Good afternoon. Welcome back to another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. This hour, we are getting down and dirty. That's right. We got Corey Rich here, photographer, director. You are an adventurer. Some might say you're a little crazy, Corey. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I've been accused of that for the better part of my life, but I think it's calculated chaos is what I really enjoy. It's
Oh,
yeah, managing chaos is what I do.
all right. We'll run with that. So, calculated master of chaos, Corey Rich is joining us. And today, like I said, we're getting down and dirty for all of you who have ever adventured or wondered what it's like to adventure, how Corey gets all those great images. He's going to let us in on some of his secrets. Now, for those of you who are on our email list or have read our Explorer blog, you might have noticed that Lowepro has a couple big announcements today. So stay tuned. We're going to be talking about Corey's creative process, some of the gear that he uses. I want to thank our sponsor for today's event, Lowepro. And Corey, I'm going to kick it over to you. I know you got a lot to go over, so the floor is
Cool.
yours.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Today's going to be fun. I'm really going to split the time. There's two things I want to talk about. One is it's subtly in this photograph, but I was part of launching the new Lowepro Photo Sport Pro 3, which is very exciting for me. I spend a lot of my time out in wild places in the backcountry, and it is always this balance between how do I get my camera gear to those locations and how do I make sure that that gear is accessible, and how do I get all of the other stuff I need, my tent, my sleeping bag, my food, and occasionally where do I pack my daughter when she tells me her legs are a little too tired to walk. And this bag is the solution. And so I will circle back to that, but I will touch on that theme. I mean, getting your equipment to the location is sort of a third of the battle. And it's a third of what it takes to make pictures. If you don't have your camera there, you're not going to make great pictures. But the other part of what I'm going to do is sort of really share some tips and tricks and talk about my journey in becoming an adventure photographer. And I hope some of the tales that I tell, they don't just apply to whether you want to be an adventure photographer. I think you can apply them to whatever it is in life you're trying to achieve, particularly in the photography world. My journey, of course, everyone's journey starts somewhere. I was a gymnast as a kid, got pretty serious about it, very competitive, became a state champion in vaulting. And one of the school teachers on my junior high school campus took notice of the short, strong kid. I did 35 pull-ups and I won our pull-up contest, and he invited me to go rock climbing. And I went rock climbing for the first time. My dad agreed to it, but he sent my older brother with me. And I fell in love with everything about the sport of rock climbing, the culture, the physical challenge, the mental challenge. And what I realized immediately is that part of the climbing culture was telling stories. It was sitting in the car and telling tales of adventure on the way to the cliff. And then on the drive home, it was more tales of adventure, and you were weaving yarns. And so I brought those stories back to the playground, and I realized that my verbal storytelling skill set was not good enough. I needed visual proof of my weekend adventures. And so I borrowed my father's camera. It was a halfway decent camera, and I bought a bunch of black and white film. And I tried to hone the craft of photography. I checked out every book from the library at our school, and I checked out VHS videotapes, and I signed up for the journalism class on campus. And I started photographing the one thing that I had access to on a regular basis, which was gymnastics. I was in a gym, 5 to 6 days a week, a couple of hours a day. And I was learning what composition meant, moments. And really kind of what I didn't realize was that in that same week span, I went rock climbing, fell in love with the world of being outdoors and adventure. And then I borrowed my dad's camera and I fell in love with the craft of photography. And I had no idea at that point, at 13 years old, that one day those two passions, photography and climbing, or photography and adventure, would overlap and turn into a career. 13 years old was a long time ago at this point. And but I continued to pursue the craft of photography. I went to journalism school, and my first summer at the news in college, I applied for a newspaper internship, and I looked at a map of California, and I selected my internship kind of in a non-traditional way. I looked at the map and I said, which newspaper is closest to Yosemite National Park so that I could go rock climbing and photograph rock climbing every weekend. But what I didn't realize was that the assignments that I was given while at the Modesto Bee newspaper really forced me to become a better photographer. I was shooting things that were unfamiliar to me, migrant workers in the Central Valley, minor league ball games. But I found I was getting bored. My calling was not to be a newspaper photographer. I picked up a camera to document weekend adventures. And I found I was getting assignments, but I started developing these personal projects to keep me entertained. And this was one of those personal projects. No matter what the assignment was, my goal was to find a found moment, meaning I couldn't set it up, of someone picking their nose. So this was a gymnastics competition. And I found I was getting more excited about this personal project than I was the assignments that I was getting paid to do at the newspaper. This was the 4th of July parade, first day of school. But it forced me to kind of look inward. And I thought to myself, why am I more interested in shooting nose picking photos, these personal projects, than the newspaper assignments? And what I learned, but this was kind of a breakthrough picture, by the way. I kind of went beyond shooting telephoto, and now I'm shooting wide angle with a little bit of layering and some depth to the image. But I finally realized I picked up a camera to document adventure. And so I sat down with my boss, Al Golub, at the newspaper, and Al helped me devise a plan to save enough money to take a semester off from college and actually apply everything that I had learned at the newspaper, but photograph what I was really passionate about, which was the adventure world, which was rock climbing. And so I had a Honda Civic at the time, and I took out all of the seats except the driver's seat, and I cut out a piece of plywood so that I could sleep on the passenger side. And I bought 100 rolls of Fuji Velvia film. And I went home to my mom and dad, and I pitched them on the idea. I was taking a semester off from college. My dad, being an educator, was not excited about that idea. He drafted a contract that evening that stated clearly I would return to school, which I signed, but I noted in my head, it said return to school. It didn't say finish school. But I went out on the road and I drove around the Western United States photographing rock climbing. And I would pull into campgrounds and I would walk right up to the campfire and I'd introduce myself. Hi, I'm Corey Rich. I'm a photography student, journalism student, and I'm taking a semester off to photograph rock climbing. And would you mind if I spent the day with you tomorrow? And it turned out 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, the answer was 100%. You're welcome to join us. And I was applying many of the rules that I learned at the newspaper, many of those lessons, which was the goal is to not just make an expected photograph, it was to make a surprising photograph, apply all of that knowledge that I had acquired from shooting assignments. It's get the safe shot, but then start really pushing harder, trying to surprise your audience, do something that your audience hasn't seen before. I also began to learn the lesson that you have to get up early and you have to stay out late to make compelling photographs. The sun waits for no one. I love that expression. You know, photography, more often than not, at least in the outdoor adventure world, does not happen at high noon. It happens at sunrise and at sunset, in those couple of hours early in the morning and those couple of hours late in the evening. And so I became much more persuasive. I learned over time during this first 6 months on the road to approach the campfire with a 6-pack of beer and loosen them up with a beverage. And then after they've had one beverage, then I would say, do you mind if I join you? And they say yes. And then one more beer. And I would say, how would you guys feel about starting at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. instead of 10 a.m.? And I learned how to get into situations in beautiful light. There was an art of persuasion. I have been from 13 years old until today, I've been trying to find the right camera bag to protect my cameras in really treacherous environments. This is a photograph of myself on El Capitan in Yosemite National Park, probably 10 years ago. There's a Lowepro bag squeezed between my knee and the wall there. And you can see this is kind of during the first generation of video-enabled DSLR cameras. I'm holding, this might actually be the Nikon D90 in my hand, but then you can see I have a Panasonic video camera also hanging off of my neck. And this was one of those experimental moments where I was shooting both stills and video, but we weren't confident that the mirrorless camera, or sorry, that the DSLR video enabled camera could shoot footage that was as good as the Panasonic. And of course, this was after this shoot, all of the footage from the D90 got used and virtually no footage from the Panasonic, because the D90 footage was cinematic. It was shallow depth of field. I was shooting wide open, versus the Panasonic looked like I was shooting at f/64 the whole time. So it was, I've watched the evolution of the sport, but what hasn't changed is it's still incredibly uncomfortable to hang in a harness for hours at a time. And having the right tools to make that comfortable and to make yourself efficient is key. And that starts with camera bags and the right camera. I was really, on that first 6 months, there was no guidebook. There was no how-to video. There was no master class or a creative live session on how to be an adventure photographer or a climbing photographer. So there was a lot of experimentation. I was always trying to figure out, how do I get the rope above the climber? Do I hike around? Do I climb the route the day before? Do I bring another party of climbers? There was a lot of trial by error, learning through making mistakes. And that's part of why I love sharing and teaching, is I love to kind of share some of those mistakes so that others don't need to make them. You can just, let's continue to raise the bar together versus burn your time making mistakes. I also realized that in photography, I talk about surprising people with pictures. And one way that you surprise people with pictures is to put the camera in a surprising location, right? Change the perspective. And that can mean laying on your back on the street. It can mean getting on top of a skyscraper. It can mean shooting from a drone. And in this case, this was a shoot some years ago with Alex Honnold. Many of you might know the name Alex Honnold. He was the star of Free Solo, the Oscar-winning film that Jimmy Chin and his wife Chai did. But this was a shoot to launch the Nikon D4. And we went to Joshua Tree National Park. And here I am, this rock is not super steep. And so, 1,000 times I've hung on a vertical wall and pointed my camera at the climber. But the challenge was, how do we do something surprising? How do I get the camera into a surprising position? And so one night, over a campfire, and maybe there were a few beers involved, we decided, what if we buy a ladder at Home Depot? And I think it was called the Little Giant Ladder. And we spent hours attaching this to the wall so that I could get out, 6 feet from the wall. And it's all about trying, right? You've got to put energy into pushing and trying and doing something new. The story that I love about this photograph is, this photograph got used at the launch of the Nikon D4, and then years went by, and this photo had gone into our archives. And then one day it popped up in a European magazine, not a photo magazine, but a mainstream magazine. And then after that, it went viral. I think the article was, crazy things people will do to take photos. And then I saw it just go viral. It was popping up on like Instagram feeds and Facebook feeds. And my mother even forwarded it to me in one of these, crazy emails that retired people send to one another. And she had no idea it was her son. It was also like the idiotic things people do to make interesting pictures. And then about a month later, it really ran all over the place. Some news programs asked to get the photo and do interviews. And then we got a letter from the legal department of Little Giant advising us that this is not how they recommend using the ladder. And so I still have that letter from the legal department in my office. It's about pushing. It's about forcing yourself to get the expected and then evolve into the unexpected. This was a trip to Mallorca, Spain with Chris Sharma. And I was shooting with a film crew, and I was jealous. I was envious of the idea that the film crew could press record and you could see Chris Sharma climb to the hardest move, the crux of this climb called Espontas. And then you'd see him fall in slow motion. And I thought, well, this is unfair as a still photographer. How can I portray that same amount of effort and sort of the height of this climb? And so I decided to shoot a sequence of images and then stitch those images together in Photoshop. But it's always about just trying something new. Here I am, I for years have said that this is my office. I spend a lot of time hanging off of cliffs in wild environments. And it's really where I'm the most creative. And so here I am hanging, 2,000 feet off of the side of El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. You're seeing my shadow there. And hanging behind me is probably a fanny pack, a Lowepro fanny pack. And my jacket is probably tied on to the end of it. And you can tell from maybe I have a backpack on, either that or I have a back issue. And it's incredibly uncomfortable to hang in these positions. Oftentimes I'm hanging there for, an hour plus at a time, but it's like the right spot to make an interesting photograph. And so you're waiting it out. You're just gutting it out until you can make that picture. But I oftentimes get the question, what's the most dangerous situation that you've ever been in? And it was shooting this photograph. I was hanging in my harness. It's early in the morning. This is my dear friend and one of the great rock climbers of our time, Tommy Caldwell. And Tommy, some folks listening to this program might know the historical significance of the nose of El Capitan. So there's El Capitan, which is the most famous rock wall in the world in Yosemite National Park. It's 3,000 feet tall. And the prow of El Capitan is called the nose of El Capitan. And it is very storied, incredible tales of adventure on the nose. And one of the great stories is that for years, folks were trying to free climb the nose, which means they're using a rope, but they're only using their hands and feet to ascend the wall. They're never pulling on the equipment, and the rope is there for protection purposes only. And every great climber on the planet tried this. And then the first person to pull it off was a woman by the name of Lynn Hill. And Lynn is one of the legends of climbing, but it's rare in any sport that a female athlete it performs better than and before the male athletes. And not only did Lynn free climb the nose before any man, it took something like 15 years for any other human being to free climb the nose. The second person to free climb the nose was another woman by the name of Beth Rodden, also a very dear friend. And the third person to free climb the nose was her then husband, Tommy Caldwell. And so we're up on the nose and I'm photographing Beth and Tommy. And Tommy, we rappel in really early. We're sleeping up on top of this 3,000-foot granite monolith. And we rappel in early in the morning so that the temperatures are nice and cool so that his skin and his shoes can stick to that granite. And we rappel in, this is the crux pitch. It's called the changing corners pitch. And as you can tell, it looks really hard to stick to that wall and to move up. I mean, it's sort of, it's almost superhuman to be able, not many people on the planet obviously can do this. And so I've rigged my rope so that I can be farther away from the wall. So my feet are not touching the wall. I'm hanging in space. It allows me to kind of create this shallow depth of field and sense of place. And I'm hanging there. And as I'm starting to shoot pictures, I realize that my white rope, the rope that I'm hanging on, is going back into the image. And I see this white line going back to that ledge where Beth Rodden is standing in the blue jacket. And that's kind of a faux pas, right? You can't have your rope going back into the picture. That's just lazy photography. That's like shooting the most epic landscape photo, but your feet are accidentally in the edge of the frame at the bottom. And so I yell down to Beth. I say, Beth, can you untie my rope from the wall? And Beth is a little irritated, admittedly. She's belaying her husband on what is the hardest single pitch of rock climbing in the world at that time. And I'm bothering her to untie my rope because I forgot to do it when I left the belay. So she unties my rope, it swings out into space. My feet are now out of the shot. And I'm taking pictures. And then Tommy, moments after I take this picture, he blows out of the corner. And he's very frustrated because this is hard work and you only get a couple of attempts a day before your skin is too worn out and your body, you're just too fatigued. And the temperature in Yosemite is too warm. And so I'm trying, Tommy's a good friend. And so I try to sort of take some of the edge off by making a joke. And so I say, Tommy, do you want me to lower down and show you how to do that move? And he kind of half laughs and he says, yeah, do you want me to take a picture that's actually in focus? And, we kind of chuckle at one another. And at this point, Beth is lowering Tommy and I've set up my rappel device and I start rappelling down the rope and we're going at equal speeds down our respective ropes. And then out of nowhere, Tommy says, stop, what are you doing? And I think, boy, what is he talking about? But I stop abruptly and he's staring at my hands. And I look down and I realize that when the rope was untied, that it's just, there's no knot in the end. And I'm about a foot from rappelling straight off the end of the rope into midair and I would accelerate, 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet to the valley floor. And of course, my heart came out of my mouth and I shoved that back into my chest. And the lesson was oftentimes the most dangerous things we do. It's when we're complacent, when we're too comfortable in our environment, whether that's you're a street photographer and you're working around cars or questionable people. You can never take that for granted. And I remind myself of this story all the time. And I really try to double and triple check the situations that I am. I always say safety is first. I mean, it's just, there's no photograph worth taking where it risks either my health or my life. While I was on this first 6 months on the road, I would ship my film back to the newspaper, the Modesto Bee, and they were incredible because they would process 10 rolls of film at a time. They had this E6 processing machine. It was called the Wing Lynch processor, and so this was a big deal for a kid with limited money. I didn't have to pay for processing, but more valuable was then they would put my 10 rolls of film out on a light table, and I would pull over at a telephone booth and I would call the newspaper, and they would critique my photography while I was still out on the road. And usually they would kind of pull my leg. They would say, "Do you want the good news or the bad news first?" And I would say, "I don't know, I guess the bad news." And of course they would tell me all of my film was blank, and I would tear up in some phone booth on the side of the road in Utah. And then they would say, "No, we're just kidding." And they would give some real practical advice. "Hey, we noticed one of your cameras has dirt in it. It's scratching the film." And so I'd, blow out the camera. But the best advice that they gave me was on the creative front. And they told me, "Corey, you're shooting amazing pictures of rock climbers, figures in the landscape and peak action hanging off a rope. But we want to see the in-between moments. We want to see humanity. We want to see what people are doing when they're not actually rock climbing." And so I really forced myself to keep the camera with me at all times and take pictures before and after climbing. This was a trip to Moab, Utah, and Justin Bastian and we did Rochambeau, or paper, rock, scissors, for who would sleep in the back of the truck and who slept outside. Obviously, Justin lost. And when I crawled out of the truck, there was a light dusting of snow on Justin. And I crept up to Justin. I had a 20mm lens. I'm shooting film. And, this is pre-digital and silent shutters. And so I, made an exposure calculation. I pre-focused and I depressed the shutter, and the mirror flipped up, clank, clank. And Justin's arm shot out of his sleeping bag. He punched me. All of the dust flew off of his sleeping bag. But it's fleeting moments. I mean, every picture, when you see an image, you need to shoot immediately. There's no going back. Like, moments don't repeat themselves. I always think that my job as a photographer is to sort of dissect any situation and look for images. Oftentimes it means you're hunting or searching for pictures. This is on the side of El Capitan. And we're eating lunch. The athletes are eating lunch, and Tommy Caldwell, he's never going to be a foot model, it turns out. I think that part of his career is past. But I looked under the portal edge and I thought that could be a pretty cool picture. And so while they're eating lunch, I'm trying to get myself, down underneath the portal edge, and I'm shooting shallow depth of field. But that's what you do. You search for pictures, and you want to have your camera in hand or around your neck at moments where life is unfolding and it's surprising, those gritty, raw moments. I'm showing this picture because I know there's a lot of talented photographers listening to this show. And I know what you're thinking. This is an awful photograph. I'm shooting too wide. I should flip the camera vertically. His head is distorted. I'm using like an on-camera flash. Maybe I was holding it out with like a cord. But here's the deal. This picture is a game-changing photo for me, a career-changing photo. It's a stepping stone image. I was on a surf trip to Mexico in college. Some of my photos had been published at this point. I was starting to sell climbing photos, and I sold a set of images to Patagonia, the clothing company. And they loved the gritty, raw nature of the pictures that I was shooting. And so it kind of quickly evolved into, on a monthly basis, the director of photography at Patagonia would call me and say, "Corey, what do you have on your calendar next week?" And of course, I'm looking at an exam schedule on my wall, but I would answer with, "I'm wide open. What have you got?" And the only criteria was I would go on trips, anything from surf trips to mountaineering trips to rock climbing trips. And I would outfit 2 or 3 friends in Patagonia clothing. And they just wanted gritty, raw pictures of our adventure as it unfolded. Well, this was my college dorm mate, Tom Bulow, and this was a surf trip to mainland Mexico, and he got stung by a bunch of jellyfish and went into anaphylactic shock while we were in the small fishing village of Pascuales, Mexico. And the only person in this small fishing village who could administer an injection was the waitress at the local cantina, where we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner on this very same table. And I shot this picture. I only shot 2 frames and I shipped it off to Patagonia. At that time, I was shipping my raw film to Patagonia, and they would cherry pick the images that they thought would be valuable for them. And this image they identified as a full page ad in Outside Magazine, Grin and Bear It. Travel is unpredictable. Your clothes shouldn't be. Oh, that's not what I wanted to read. I wanted to read the caption below. Yesterday, I was eating lunch on the same table. Now the lady who cooked my meal is moonlighting as my nurse. There are things you can prepare for in Mexico, but often you're confronted with the unexpected. Passing a kidney stone, tropical jellyfish, and a stomach infection from hell. 3,000 miles on the road and 3 trips to the hospital in 2 weeks, all for 4 days of good surf. Still my answer to was it worth it? I'll be back, Tom Bulow. So this photograph runs in Outside Magazine, and an executive from a .com company called quackasports.com is flying home from Europe in the first class cabin, flipping through the magazine. He sees this photograph and he says, this is the look that we want for our company. And within a couple of months, the company Quacka Sports has hired me to fly to the Sahara Desert and photograph an adventure race across the Sahara Desert. And I always say that each opportunity leads to the next opportunity. It was this incredible experience. I was shooting on digital cameras. We were uploading to this thing called the World Wide Web. I'm pretty convinced that only like 7 people saw the photographs that we shot, because when I got that assignment, I didn't even have an email address. But one job leads to the next job. And it turned out Brian Turkelson, this vice president at Quacka Sports, he was buddies with a guy named Mark Burnett, who later became sort of the godfather of reality television and created Survivor and The Apprentice and a number of other shows. But Mark reached out to me and he said, hey, Corey, Brian says you're pretty good at photography. You like sleeping in the dirt. You don't complain much, and you're cheap. And he hired me to photograph his first television show called the Eco Challenge Adventure Race. And so he was traveling me all over the world. Here I am in Vietnam, New Zealand. And I loved shooting these types of pictures because there's this perfect convergence of being a newspaper photographer, a documentary photographer, capturing found moments as they unfold in front of me, anticipating those moments. But also I was in an adventurous environment. I wasn't shooting the 4th of July parade. And I'm doing all of the same things that I did at the newspaper. I'm looking for details, wide establishing shots, interesting angles. But I found myself drifting. I found myself going right back to that same project. Here I was in these exotic locations. And I don't know what it was. Adventure racing, the athletes were incredible. They're world-class endurance athletes. But it was a race. It was an organized event. And so I found myself, here I am in these incredible locations, and I start reverting back to this nose picking project. And so I had to kind of look inward. I show this photo, and it's taken me a long time to admit. I often get the question, what is your favorite photo that you've ever shot? And it's hard for me to admit this, but this might be the image I'm proudest of. This was the very last eco challenge that I shot in Fiji for Mark Burnett. And Fiji is a country of many, many islands. And I was positioned on one of the islands, photographing teams as they kind of, traversed the island. And then they, got in a canoe or kayak and paddled to the next island. And so for the production, we were using lots of helicopters, and I thought my last team had passed. So I hiked down to the landing zone on this island, and it was near this village, and a bunch of kids were out kicking a ball around, and all of a sudden I'm standing there with all this camera equipment, and they know that the helicopter is going to land because it's flagged off as a landing zone. And I've radioed, okay, it's Corey, I'm ready to be picked up and moved to my next assignment. And I look over, and I've never seen this before, never seen it since. I see this kid put 2 fingers, 1.5 knuckles deep into his nose. And of course I spin around, but I miss it. I miss the moment. Before I can even get my camera up, I miss the moment. And I have this kind of ethical dilemma in my head. I learned at the newspaper, humans repeat behaviors. And so I think if I can just wait this out, and if this kid sticks around because he wants to see the helicopter, there's a high likelihood this is going to happen again. And so I get on the radio and I tell a little bit of a white lie, say, "This is Corey again. I take that back. I need more time. I think there's one more team that's going to pass through." And I'm sitting in the most uncomfortable spot. It's like 100 degrees and 100% humidity, and I'm in the sun. And I do what any newspaper photographer would do. I take my camera and I focus on an object equidistant to my left, knowing that this kid is on my right. So I pre-focus, and I have dark sunglasses on, and I'm just getting fried in the sun. But I'm just staring at this kid and watching my watch, thinking, I don't know how long he's going to wait. Maybe I've got 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm watching the clock, and I know that eventually I've got to really go and do my job, the reason I'm getting paid to be here. And eventually I see both fingers go up, and I spin around, and like a machine gun, it's not even in focus. But the point is, it was a transitional moment in my life. I realized I wanted assignments that were true adventure, where the outcome was uncertain. I like being challenged. I like being surrounded by people that have a like mind and like the kind of discovering the kind of human limit. And I started taking on assignments that would really challenge me. This was a water-filled cave diving assignment in the Yucatan Peninsula. Definitely a wild world. It's got to be one of the most dangerous activities, right up there with wingsuit base jumping. But they're uncovering incredible archaeology in these caves. I live in Lake Tahoe, California, but I moved to Lake Tahoe for the climbing, for the summer weather. And I realized pretty quickly that it snows a lot in Lake Tahoe. And so I learned how to ski. And, with any activity that I'm doing, it's not just learning the activity, it's then learning how do you use a camera to tell a story in those environments. And there are a million lessons in learning how to use a camera underwater. There's a million lessons in learning how to use a camera when photographing in the snow. This one of the lessons that I learned early on photographing skiing was that I became an adequate skier. I could get myself safely into positions to then radio up to the great skier and have them make this turn through deep powder. And it only takes one time to make this mistake. I have a Lowepro rear entry backpack on. That's really critical, right? You want to set your backpack, you pack down a spot in the powder, and then you set your backpack down, on its face. You unzip your backpack, you take out the camera, you're very careful to not let snow, pour into the backpack, because on a cold powder day, that is no fun trying to extract the snow from your backpack or get it off the front of the lens. And so I did it once, and I've never done it again. I did not bother to close the back of my backpack. I just left it wide open, and I had the skier, come in really hot and make a turn right in front of me. And of course, it put 3 feet of snow on top of and in my camera bag. And then I spent the next hour trying to clean my camera bag out and get the, wet melting snow off of my lenses and outside, off of the camera. So you learn lessons. And I think I always like to say that as photographers, that's what folks are hiring. They're hiring someone to not make the same mistake twice, right? Anytime I'm doing a job for the first time, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. But one thing I pride myself on is noting those mistakes, kind of documenting in my mind or in my journal what is the teachable moment, and making certain, trying my best to not make that same mistake twice. This was a trip to the Chillicothe River in Lake Clark National Park. I love telling stories, and this is again where I apply my photojournalism roots to adventure. I love telling stories that actually move the needle, that actually make a difference in the world. We did this story because there was the largest gold mine in the world. It would have been in just outside of Lake Clark National Park, the Pebble Mine. And so I went on this trip with a biologist and a geologist, a representative from the Sierra Club, a lawyer, and a guide and a writer. and we really traveled down to the headwaters of the Chillicothe River, where there's more breeding of sockeye salmon than anywhere else in the world. And the fear was that if the Pebble mine, the proposed Pebble mine went through, it would threaten the largest sockeye run in the world. And knock on wood, to date, the Pebble mine has not. They have not gotten permission to build the Pebble mine in Alaska. I mean, it seems to teeter and go back and forth based on politics and our administration. But I love telling stories that are meaningful. This is Rebecca Rush. I love working with world-class athletes. I think, one of the gifts of being a photographer, I like to say that it's the golden ticket. It's the backstage pass to life. And it affords opportunities to spend time with people that otherwise we would never have an opportunity to be exposed to. Rebecca is one of those people. Her nickname is the Queen of Pain. And Rebecca is famous for doing big endurance events and fast and beating the guys. So 24-hour races are kind of that's like the sprint. She's really good at the multi-day events. And so this is shooting with Rebecca in Moab, Utah. One of the things that I love about photography is a lot of these relationships turn into long-term relationships. And they're very personal relationships, unlike mainstream sports where you're standing on the sideline of a field and you're pointing a camera at a person with a number on their back. For me, I'm oftentimes sharing planes and trains and automobiles and tents, and we're getting wet together and cold and suffering together. And I really love the camaraderie that comes out of those experiences. This was while shooting the launch photos and video for the Nikon D4 several years ago. And, I oftentimes think about how do I differentiate myself from any other photographer? What skills do I have? There's a lot of talented photographers out there, many folks that can see through the lens and see in beautiful ways. They have the technical mastery of the camera. They own the right equipment. But I realize that what I can bring to the table is I'm comfortable in vertical environments. And so here I am hanging off of a cliff in Veracruz, Mexico, photographing Dane Jackson, who is unquestionably one of the greatest kayakers of all time. In this photograph, he was just turning 21 years old. And a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I went to Chile with him. He was then 25 or 27 years old. And he paddled over the second largest waterfall in the world at nearly 200 feet. But again, it's what can you do? What can you bring to the table that the photographer to your right or the photographer to your left can't bring to the table? And I realize that my background in climbing allows me to get into positions that otherwise are challenging to put yourself in. I like to say that I'm the most creative when I'm a participant in the adventure, when my heart's beating at 150 beats per second and sweat's dripping into my eye. And I'm really a member of the team. I'm making decisions with my teammates about how far we're going that day. We're managing the risk. Is the snowfall dangerous? Are we in avalanche danger? Is the storm moving in? This is with David Lama and Peter Ortner many years ago in Patagonia, Argentina. That glowing mountain in the background is called Cerro Torre, and it's one of the most sought after granite peaks on the planet. And Patagonia is famous for really, really horrendous weather, some of the worst weather on the planet during the winter. And so you oftentimes, when doing an expedition to Patagonia, you spend a lot of time waiting for the weather to clear so that you can make an attempt at going into the mountains. And so we had been sitting idle for 2 weeks in town, in the small town of El Chaltén, in a hostel. And finally we saw the barometric pressure changing. And so we knew that meant it was time to blast off into the mountains. And so we packed our gear quickly, and we, at midnight, started to hike into the mountains and across the glacier. And there's a couple of things that when I look at this picture, I'm reminded of. You can see that Peter in the background, he's carrying my tripod. And that's part of a team. I mean, these are two world-class athletes. There's no one on the planet that can keep up with world-class athletes and carry camera equipment and make pictures. And so that's part of that open dialogue. We're talking about, I'm a minimalist. I'm bringing a minimal amount of equipment, carbon fiber tripod, tiny tripod head, super lightweight, and minimal amount of camera equipment, one body, 2 or 3 lenses. And I'm always making decisions about when do I stop and make a picture and when do I just keep up with the athletes, because there's only so much fuel in the tank, right? You just can't constantly be shooting. So you're editing even before you depress that shutter, even before you burn calories to pull the camera out of the bag. You're making decisions as to whether it's worth it in this situation to make a picture or not make a picture. And I thought this was pretty good. So I would oftentimes run ahead, pull my camera out, shoot a photo as they would pass. And then, but you can only do that a few times before you're out of juice. I show this photo and I spent a lot of time with David Lama, who's on the right there. And sadly, David is no longer with us. He died in the mountains a couple of years ago in Canada. And it's a reminder that, the mountains give us so much, but they can also take so much away. And, I go back to that idea that safety is always first in my book. But I show this photograph because there's a lesson in it. This is in the Karakoram Mountains in Pakistan. And, I don't know how many folks listening to this have slept above 20,000 feet. And on an airplane, it doesn't count, but 20,000 feet outdoors, in a sleeping bag. And well, if you have, that it's really uncomfortable. It's impossible to get a good night of sleep when you're sleeping at 20,000 feet. You wake up gasping for air. You usually have a headache. And we're sleeping at about 20,000 feet here. This is, we were trying to climb the Trango Tower, which is another amazing granite spire just in the shadow of K2 in the Karakoram Mountains. And so to put it in perspective, a day like this starts early in the morning, and we climbed for 10 hours. We were on the side of a granite wall, and then we got to the shoulder. We're either wearing or hauling our backpacks with us. And then we dug out a snow cave in this kind of snow and ice to get out of the wind because it was really windy. And when we got to the shoulder and we dug out the snow cave, I'm a human just like Peter and David. All I wanted to do was crawl into this snow cave and start boiling soup for dinner and fall asleep, have a bad night of sleep. But I was so tired and so exhausted. But the thing is, I'm a photographer. And so when we got up there, I looked out and it was bright. It was, an hour earlier. And I saw them turn on their headlamps because it was kind of dark in the snow cave. And I thought to myself, there's going to be a moment where the ambient exposure of the sky is going to match the exposure of their headlamps. And if I can just wait it out, this is going to be an opportunity possibly to make an interesting photograph when those exposures were similar. And so this is part of being a photographer. You suck it up, you just deal. And I knew if I took my boots off and my crampons off and I crawled into my sleeping bag, I was never getting back out. I was going to fall asleep. And so I played a mental game with myself and I embraced discomfort. I started thinking about everything but where I was. Started thinking about petting my dog when I got home, buying a Chipotle burrito when I landed in Reno, Nevada before driving up to South Lake Tahoe. And I just waited and I waited and I waited. And I reminded myself that discomfort is temporary, but the photograph will be forever. And I made this picture, and it doesn't always work this way. Oftentimes you wait it out, and it doesn't work. The sky clouds up, it goes gray bird. But I always look at this picture and it's a reminder to myself, but I hope it helps other photographers. It's, if you're sitting inside drinking coffee, watching the sunrise outside, you're kind of blowing it. Or if you're having a cocktail and you're watching the sun set outside the, the bar, your kitchen window, you're also blowing it. You've got to be out there. Like, you can talk about photography all you want. You can read books about photography. You can take master classes. You can watch seminars like this, but you've got to do it. You've got to actually, it's muscle memory. It's repetition. It's doing it as frequently as you can. And let's face it, that's the fun part. I mean, seminars are fun. Books are great to read, but making pictures, those experiences, that's what it's really about. I'm going to show a quick video. And this is, I had the great honor of helping to both design and launch the new Photosport Pro 3. And I'm going to share this video quickly and just talk about the bag and talk about the process of creating a new tool that allows you to make better pictures. There's no better alarm clock than having a sense of purpose. Owning a camera is as good a reason as any to fill each and every day with adventure, from first to last light. Of course, those moments are fleeting because time waits for no one. That's why I choose systems that allow me to move fast and light, even over multi-day adventures through the backcountry. I can carry all of my gear and know that my cameras and lenses are fully protected and always easily accessible for when inspiration strikes. For me, the real way to measure success is found in the number of sunrises and sunsets I see, the stories I get to bring home, and the friends I make along the way. So I'm pretty excited about this bag. This is a pretty exciting project for me, in that I've been using Lowepro bags since I was, 15 years old. I've helped design a number of bags over the years. And I love that the team at Lowepro actually listens. Like, the design team wants to understand what working pros are dealing with in the field and how they can help make your job easier so that you can focus your energy on making pictures and being creative, as opposed to just baggage handling. So this process started, a year and a half ago. And, there's a portion of my career where I spend time in the mountains carrying both camera equipment, but also overnight backpacking equipment. And as you know, as you combine those words, photography and backpacking or mountains, your load gets pretty heavy. And there's this challenge, which is, how do you make certain that you have all of the stuff that you need for inclement weather, for being comfortable outside, but also accessible cameras? And the Photosport Pro 3, I think, is the best solution thus far. And so I wanted to dissect a little bit of how the design process works, but also how a project like this, that video, gets shot. So the design process went on for about a year, with many samples. We'd get on Zoom calls and we'd spend a couple of hours talking about what would the ideal bag be. And I would pull out all of my old Lowepro bags and I would talk about what I liked and what I disliked about the old bags. And it's always in the pursuit of how do we improve upon what has already happened. And there's a lot of field testing, right? Like, that's why I love being involved with the design process, because it's one thing to talk about it when you're sitting comfortably in your office at home or your kitchen. It's another thing to go into the field and use it. And this is how you do it. We went into the field. I did many trips into the field to hike with the bag, try to use the bag. But in shooting that short video to help launch the product, I'm also out there making pictures. We're not just shooting a film, I'm making pictures, and I'm making certain that the function is working. So here we are, like, days like this is one monster day. We probably left our homes at 3 or 4 in the morning. It was midsummer. Summers are really hard for shooting both sunrises and sunsets. It means, you're getting up extremely early to shoot a 5:30 or 5 a.m. sunrise. And we had to hike a couple of miles to get up to this ridgeline. And frankly, we were running a little behind. And so this is the first photo that I shot that day. The moon was rising and my two friends were hiking there. And then, of course, I pivoted angles and looked the other direction and saw that with their headlamps, I could silhouette them against the rising sky. And of course, at each of these moments, I'm flipping the backpack off, unzipping the rear entry, pulling out my camera, changing lenses, making exposure and composition decisions, shooting a photograph, while, keep in mind, there's a small film crew that's working with me, and they're sort of saying, wait, we're not ready. And then I'm waiting for them. And then they say, unzip the bag. And I'm unzipping the bag 4 times. And then I'm pulling out the camera and I'm trying to make compelling pictures while we're filming. I did not wear the right clothing. The day that I went and scouted this location, it was nice, and it was a warm day, no breeze, perfectly still. The day we went out to shoot, of course, this is Murphy's Law of production. It was like 30 degrees and 40-mile-an-hour wind up on the ridge line. And I mean, I think I was freezing cold for 4 hours. Shorts, not a good idea. I think in the end, I ended up borrowing a jacket from one of the assistants, a thin windbreaker, and wearing it underneath my fleece jacket because I could barely hold the camera. But you can see the rear entry was really valuable. I've got my water bottle on the side. The rear entry was important to me. I hate setting my backpack down in dirt on its back and then putting that dirt back on my shirt. Over a few days that gets really messy. So here we are on this ridge line. I'm always trying to create diversity of images. This was early in the summer, as you can tell in the Sierra Nevada mountains. You're seeing some snow in the background. I'm a small person also. That's really important to me, that a bag is made in such a way that it's adjustable. And I'm about 5'2" and 130 pounds. And so the same bag that fits on a 300-pound person that's 6'5" does not fit well for me. So one of the things I lobbied for was two different sizes, 55 liters and 70 liters. Frankly, the bigger person just needs more stuff, and their stuff is bigger. And I wanted a fully adjustable system with different sized belts and shoulder straps. So there's small, medium, and large straps, and it adjusts down to even a slender waist on a small person. That's really important. If you're going to hike 20 miles in a day, you do not want that bag chafing on you. So I'm always thinking in terms of shoot wide. Here's a wide shot. Then I jump in there and shoot medium. You can tell that's the appropriate clothing to be wearing: pants, a puffy jacket. You can see he has like a real jacket in the background. I shoot a lot. I like to shoot a lot of frames and I edit afterwards. I love sun flare and I love hair blowing in the wind. I kind of want those imperfect moments. Then I switch to a long lens and I'll shoot compressed against that same environment. And again, I'm doing a lens change each time I'm shooting one of these photos. I'm really kind of moving quickly. I'm thinking about diversity. I'm, focusing on the foreground. I'm stopping to smell the roses, as they say, while my athletes walk past me. This is, you can see I'm kind of moving quickly. There's side entry on the bag. Actually, now I'm forgetting if that made it into the final design or not. Anyhow, that'll get corrected later if I'm wrong. But I'm oftentimes, hiking with the camera out. You can see that I have a Manfrotto tripod on the right side. I like to keep, for the most part, everything in the bag. I don't strap stuff to the outside except a water bottle if I'm not using a bladder, and a tripod if I'm using a tripod, if I'm shooting long exposures. Here I am on that rock slab. I'm kind of shooting through a tree. I'm looking for a lot of visual diversity. We did a lot of walking that day to kind of get to different environments. And you can see lots of lens changes, and all of those lens changes take time. And so the efficiency of that bag, the quick opening the back of the bag to make a picture makes a big deal, or it's a big deal. Inside is what we're calling the gear ups. Those are the small kind of compartment like camera blocks that you can put all of your lenses in. And then if you want to go for a quick day hike from your base camp, as I'm doing here, then you can use this runabout bag. It's just a super lightweight, almost alpine pack, and I put my gear up inside of it, and I can shoot out to make pictures outside of base camp, or if there's more technical climbing. I love this feature of the bag, just super light and fast, and I can really kind of make pictures in an efficient way. Again, sun up to sunset. We were out there for sunrise. Now we're watching the sunset. I'm documenting kind of the lifestyle of getting the tent set up, a nice quiet moment. And sometimes I can't wait as a photographer until finally I'm out of light so that I get a chance to hang out and talk and just be a part of the experience. Definitely check out the Lowepro site. Really, a couple of cool products were launched today. Of course, I'm a little biased. I'm very, very excited about the Photosport Pro 3. But remember, always have fun when you're out there. Photography is all about having fun. If you enjoyed any of these stories, I have a book out called Stories Behind the Images, and you can order that on Amazon. a lot of fun tales, behind the scenes stories, mostly my mistakes. And I am happy to answer any questions. I know we have a couple of minutes left. And if there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Definitely. Yeah. I was about to go off, Corey, and then I'm like, oh, you got the book. I'm like, maybe I should buy the book before asking the questions and ask what's not answered. We'll circle back around after I have a chance to go through it. But Cameron's asking about keeping your gear in tip-top shape. Other than the bags for storage, is there any other stuff that you rely upon to keep your gear in top shape?
Yeah, I will say I usually, when I'm traveling, I'll carry one Lowepro bag onto the plane with like the essential equipment that I need to shoot. Oftentimes I'll carry a roller bag. Actually, I'll just roll the largest legal roller that Lowepro makes with kind of as much of my camera gear as I need. And then packed somewhere in my checked baggage is the backpack, or the backpacks plural, that I'm going to use when I get into the field. And the rationale is, if everything got lost, I could still do my job, and I have all of the equipment and I can adapt. If I have to check cameras under the plane, then I'll put my cameras in a Lowepro backpack, but then stick that in a Pelican case, just a big Pelican case for protection. I like having Pelican cases on expeditions because sort of, you can sit on them, they can get rained on, they can fall out into the water, and that your camera equipment is safe. But I'm just very conscious. I'm never sloppy about letting, I'm taking good care of the camera equipment, because when that stuff goes down and you're in a remote location, there's no fixing it. There's no repair. So it's, you just want to be very conscious of how you're handling that equipment, that it's in your sight, and that you have kind of a safe place to put it. And I say safe place, meaning, all of the Lowepro bags have rain covers. But when it's really storming, if I have the opportunity to then put the bag inside of a Pelican case, or if we're going to be bouncing around in trucks and Jeeps on dirt roads, I love kind of putting it in yet another layer of protection.
I guess adventure photographers really have to live by the gear matters mantra. A lot of
Yeah,
photographers like the gear matters. you
yeah,
can't you
yeah.
can't bring a paper bag out there.
No, it's true. It is true. So yeah, that's right. If you can't get your gear there, if it's not working when you finally get to the spot, that mantra about gear doesn't matter. Yeah, you're
Good luck.
yeah.
Now, your final question is coming from Jace Kalinsky. If you were to give any advice to your younger self when you were just starting out, what would it be?
You know, boy, that's a great question. I think I think the key is make time to actually do what you love. That's it. There's plenty of things in life that pull us, the kind of normal things in life, um, parties and socializing, and it's do what you love. So carve out time to do what you love. And if that's photography, don't talk about it, don't read about it. Just get out and do it a lot, and make sacrifices. Give up some of that other kind of mundane, ordinary stuff, because I think that's what makes you special as a human, is when you really put time into the things that light you up, that really ignite you as a person. And so it's be uncompromising, do what you love as often as you can, tirelessly, and that opens doors.
Wonderful advice for photography and life in general. Thank you, Corey Rich, for really just not just incredible stories, but a great outlook. And I think this is words of wisdom that apply no matter what type of photography you're doing. I mean, it's all the same at the end of the day. You got to chase your dreams, do what you love, not stay stagnant. And you're a perfect exemplification of that.
Well, thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of the presentations, everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you, Corey. A huge thank you again to our sponsor for today's event, Lowepro. Make sure you check Corey's book out, Stories Behind the Images, on Amazon. Check out Corey Rich Productions on Instagram, Twitter at Corey Rich, and Facebook Corey Rich. Make sure you go show him some love, get that book. And if you are not on our mailing list, if you did not get this email that announced this big launch day for Lowepro, get on the email list. Go on Beaten H's website, check out these exciting offers from Lowepro, all the new gear that they have coming out. And stay tuned for our last two webinars of the day coming at you at 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern time. But that's all we have for now. Huge thanks to Corey and Lowepro for making this event happen. Catch y'all next time.
Thanks a bunch.